Oh my goodness, it is me back on the mic, my beautiful voice, not Brandon's. Haha. But we are chasing clarity, health and fitness podcast. Myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz, as always, on the other mic today. Ooh, a touchy subject. Episode 72, weight loss resistance. Does metabolic adaptation cause weight loss resistance and predict weight regain? Ooh, it's going to be a hard one, I suspect. But with that being said, B, how's your week going? How's things in your world? You look tan, you look beautiful, you look like you're fresh. So what's
I
life
even
like?
got a brand new haircut for you, my man. You know,
I'm
I
bald. I
wanted to
don't know
look
what that
fresh.
shit's like.
It's been a long time to be honest with you. But anyway, I am pumped to be back on the line with you. As honestly, this has been the longest that we've went without recording a podcast in the year and a half that we've had this show. As last week, as the audience will know, I recorded a solo episode for the first time, and I'll tell you, you know. I love Eric. We did a phenomenal job, but I am not a host, to say the least. I'm the person that speaks. So we kind of transitioned roles, and you were missed, to say the least. But you were on vacation, and so I took the role of host. We had Eric Helms on, the previous week, and it just released this past week. But my last 2 weeks have went well, my man. This past weekend, I actually had family fly in from Boca, from different parts of Florida, but mainly Boca, and I got to spend really good quality time with them. It was much of my family that I haven't seen, including my godmother, I haven't seen in 1 to 2 years. So I really took advantage, soaked up some quality time and enjoyed the latter end of summer with them. Also, just because I know that you're gonna rib me for this once I release it, but I actually just landed a brand new romance cover novel, which will be released next month. So
You got to fill me in
I'm
on
gonna
this.
be, I'm gonna be signing that for you and sending one your way.
Are you in white underwear? That's all I want
I
to
am
know.
not. So
Okay.
truth be told, I have never done in all the years I've done over 100 photo shoots. I've never done an underwear shoot, and I don't ever plan on doing so. So that has been something that I haven't been interested in, nor will I go into in later stages of life. So don't think that you're going to sign me up for that OnlyFans or whatever the thing you've been trying to get me online for. But I did land a romance cover novel. It's pretty much just my face. So, whatever. It is what it is. But I've also been on a ton of podcasts over the last week because we didn't record. And actually, the episode with Eric Helms, I recorded 2 weeks ago. So last week it was all in the clear. So, I did a bunch of podcast recording with different, podcast guests and hosts and things of that sort. So if anyone's interested in checking out any of those podcasts, first I was on the Metflex and Chill podcast hosted by Rachel Gregory, talking about energy flux. So that's one of my favorite topics. Then I did a 2-part series already that has come out the last 2 weeks, which was on the Living Lean podcast hosted by Jeremiah Bayer, where we did 2 female-specific episodes covering the first being fat loss, hormone health, and metabolism, as well as covering how to avoid common nutritional mistakes to optimize women's body composition. And then I also just recorded a podcast with actually one of our longtime listeners. So shout out to Philip Pape. He listens to every episode we do. So he had invited me on the show, and that will release the same day that this does. So Chasing Clarity, you guys know, always goes out on Friday afternoons. His podcast goes out on Fridays as well. And that will be around the topics of how to make fat loss feel easier so that you can get lean and stay lean. And then also, just before I tie this up, and I really want to jump into your week, I do want to read out let me find this, an email from a podcast listener of the show, because she sent us an incredibly nice email, and you were away on vacation, so I didn't want to bother you. But I do want to read it out so that obviously hear it first and foremost, and then also just as a appreciation, because it's always nice to get this type of feedback. So she starts with, this is a long email, so I'm sorry. I just felt the need that I needed to reach out and say thank you for everything. I've been listening to the Chasing Clarity podcast for the past few weeks, and I wish I had found you and others sooner. I'm a hospital dietitian in the UK, so hugely knowledgeable about clinical nutrition, but sports and performance nutrition is a whole nother story. Up until this last year, again, following the wrong people on social media, and now based on listening to people like you guys, I've really tapped into performance/hobby building, nutrition, and incorporating it into my lifestyle. You guys make it so easy to incorporate evidence and your experience into something everyone can apply. Thank you again. I've learned so much from you, and my life is so much better for it. So I appreciate you so much more than you would ever know. So a huge shout out, first and foremost, to Catherine for this email, as Jeff and I came together, over a year and a half ago, really with the intention to cut through the bullshit within this industry and to provide both evidence as well as our experience, and to really provide clarity on complex topics. So it's really nice. It fills my heart with joy and with warm feelings when we get some feedback where people acknowledge or even just, share their experience and be like, listen, I believed all this mysticism and these myths and misconceptions and misinformation, disinformation, and like you guys opened my eyes to the light on something. So I always appreciate that. And as always, guys, this is why we come to you every single week, and we really do try to provide a lot of quality evidence-based information first and foremost, but then also like our own experience, which goes far as well, because you're talking to guys that combine, we have 3 decades within this industry, within this sport, and within working with people. And that's really what, it's not just about knowledge without application is bullshit. You guys can, if you just want to stay in PubMed all day, that's all good and well. Believe me, I can read the literature as well as anyone else. However, I also had gotten a ton of experience by integrating it. And then we also have, Jeff, that you have more than 2 decades of experience, having worked with thousands of people at this point, owning a gym. And I think that we bring a really nice combination to the audience. And it's something that we love doing, but also other people appreciate. So it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate hearing feedback like that. Like I share a lot of the YouTube videos that we do with my clients, my weekly check-in reminder. Like I like to send my clients an email like, hey, the check-in window is now open. I know what's going on my week, share a little education, and then my process. So I get a lot of good feedback. And if you guys got more, gladly send them, just not voice notes. But with that
Although, you know what,
said,
I will say, so before we go on the voice note thing, the only person allowed to send you or I a voice note, and the only reason I say this is I just received one from Dr. Scott Stevenson. That is my man. So he's allowed to send me a voice note, and we will be actually getting him on the show. I was unable to respond to him yet because I literally got the voice note right before, I jumped on the line with Jeff, but I was discussing some concepts with him, and we've been going back and forth on a couple hypertrophy related topics. And so we will be getting him on the show sometime within the next month or so.
yeah, the science of hypertrophy is blowing up, just kind of like the science of, I guess, well, lack of science. I wouldn't say science. The functional medicine world kind of blew up during COVID with gut health and hormones and all the other
Adrenals, everything.
47,000. Yeah, and that's just the consequence of the modern lifestyle. And when people kind of get that brought to their attention, they're able to change it. But I love Scott, man. He gave a hell of a presentation in Nashville and in Tampa.
Yeah, he did.
So if you guys ever get a chance to chat with him, see a presentation of his, follow his lectures, all his stuff. His book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, I'm about halfway through it, is a great, great read, just as far as laying stuff out for yourself.
I have read that 5 times in a row.
Yeah. Oh.
So I've really dove into that. That is, Scott has been one of the most impactful figures in my career in terms of my education. So I have the utmost gratitude and appreciation for him, to say the least. And so anytime, here's the thing, Scott is someone, he's a very inquisitive person. He will never give you a direct answer. He will always send you where to find it. And I have an email chain from him back in like 2019 where we went back maybe over the course of 50 or 60 emails, and he really showed me some ways on keyword searching for looking through PubMed and Science Direct and things like that. And I stopped asking him questions from then on in. And I always tell him, listen, I'm only going to reach out to you if I've literally went to the depths of trying to find out something and I literally cannot find it. And there's a couple topics related to hypertrophy that I really want to dive in with him, especially from a mechanistic aspect. I told you I've been diving more and more into biomechanics, and there's certain things that I really want to get his personal and professional opinion on. So I'm looking forward to having him on and us really getting into the nitty gritty, because that is one person that is without a doubt the smartest man in bodybuilding. And I say that with no hesitation.
I will say this, what makes him smart was what John Meadows talked to me about back when I visited him a couple of times, just chat with him a lot on the boards, was the ability to take something very complex and still make it digestible for people to be like, oh, okay. And like walk away with the idea and the concept and be able to utilize it. So, well, I'm looking forward to get him on. I think it'll be great. But we're probably going to have him on for like 6 episodes straight because he knows so much shit. We might be like, can you book out 6 weeks straight just for us to cover all these topics?
He already told me, he said, I think I could do like a 2-hour block. And I was like, all right, whatever time you got, we're going to keep going with it. So even if you got to get off, Jeff, I'm going to extend that window.
No, I can do 2 hours with enough notice. I just need to know because I got to be able to ice my back or stuff because just it sucks sitting this long. Yeah, dude. I mean, I've overcome that injury, but still, it's like after sitting for a little bit, I get stiff. It's part of being about 43. Well, let me get into like my last week. Yes. Oh shit. I was in California. Stephen Pressfield interviewed me for my book, and then we had an amazing conversation. I have to say that I asked him in the interview, I said, so Stephen, I have to ask you, why did you pick me to mentor? Because he doesn't do that for anybody. And he was like, because I knew you'd get it done. And it was like the greatest feeling for me, like to have this New York Times bestseller, this guy who coined the term resistance, like father resistance is what I was calling him and stuff, be able to say that about me. And I was like, you're right. I had that propensity. I might not get it done the fastest, but I will get shit done where most people let things go. Got trained in California. I just got a moment to like just soak in an accomplishment that not many people can do and pull off. And that was super cool. Business has been good. Constant stuff with turning over coaching staff, just things like that, that, when you work with people and you're working and growing, oftentimes the alignments are never the same. As you start working and growing, you find that the visions are two different things than what people want. So made some internal choices and decisions that are best for everybody. And that's something that, years ago would have really bothered me. And I probably would have been like all beat up about it. But, Andy Frisella said something, and I want to encourage this to all coaches. When you guys go through the natural turnover of a staff, or you guys go through the natural turnover of any business, the people who start with you don't necessarily finish with you. And the people who come along the way don't always finish with you either. And that's part of being in the entrepreneurship. That's why they call it a lonely thing. And you have to kind of just know that your vision, if it's what you see and what you believe, that has to champion you and carry you against all odds. So it was a week of total great reflection for myself and how far I've come before I turned 43. So I was tickled to death being in that moment. Got an amazing picture in front of Santa Monica Pier with my girl to celebrate our memory there. And just, it was just great, man. I could keep going on and on and on, but for me, it was just a simple moment of just, there's a bodybuilding stage that you cross in Defiance that I did back in July when nobody thought I would. But there was this moment where literally a man helped me put my whole story to life just because he believed my story was worth telling. And he taught me so much, and I could only repay it in so many ways. But I actually want to get Steven on our podcast, and I want to just chat with him about the concept of turning pro. Kind of like a newer age one, because he's got like 5 books he's written already that aren't published yet. He's like, you can't release a book a week. And I'm like, dude, the guy literally works like 6 hours at his desk. Like he would put you and I probably to shame.
Yeah, he's a professional.
Yeah, and I think that that's something to understand, because he talks about, the journey from amateur to pro. And I think even that. Like you were living a shadow career as your supplement guy, and it was the amateur career. And then once you went all in, well, fuck, that's your turning pro moment. And since then, look what you've done. You've grown an online brand. You've gone back to school. You're now looking at doing research biomechanics with someone. Like you're really looking to shore up all the deficits. And that's what it is in turning pro. So, with that being said, it was a good week. So, guys, before we get into this, be sure to like us, share us, rate us on Spotify. It better be fucking 5 stars. Don't give a shit if you don't like our last 7 days. But with that,
although I will say, no, we're getting into this real quick before we jump into the podcast. I have received so much good feedback that people so we had gotten that feedback, and that's what spurred us 2 episodes ago. I said, fuck it, Jeff, I'm giving you a full recap, my man. I will say that I've received multiple emails, DMs, and comments about how people, and even in like when I share the actual podcast, I'll do a permanent post on my wall. Even people said on that post that they enjoy our recaps first and foremost. And then I felt guilty because I had recorded the podcast with Eric Helms right after we recorded that podcast. So I didn't do an update. So I thought like the audience is definitely going to think that we did it for one. We didn't hear any feedback. We did a recap and then we decided to discard it. But we are back, guys. So I just want to say thank you for caring first and foremost. I feel like that allows you to get to know us a little bit better, especially because we have an audience where these are other coaches that we've interacted with. We've met you guys at conferences, or these are fellow clients of ours, or just, everyone that shares the show, I always respond to. I know Jeff does as well. We go back and forth in DMs or with emails and stuff. Like we're super interactive. And I kind of pride myself on that. I know you do as well, Jeff. Like we would not be here, you and I together, if it wasn't for podcasting, because we're going to cover metabolic adaptation today. But almost 4 years ago, that was what the concept that brought us together. You asked me, you said, listen, I know you have a lot of knowledge on this topic. Will you come on the Excellence Cartels to speak about this? And that is what started this relationship. And we've been going at it, all these years, my man.
I got to share something though. And this is the thing that, I want to point out about you. You never talked to me about coming on the Excellence Cartel. You just chatted with me. It was passive conversation. Excuse me, that went into conversations about work that then developed into a phone call where I was picking, you're picking my brain. I was like, go fucking train gym pop. You'll be way happier. You'll make more money and so forth. And then from that, I watched your content and I was like, dude, you're going to know so much shit. Come on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I really want to make this evident.
Yeah.
I want to make this evident. That was never my intention. Yes. You guys had a thriving podcast. I had the utmost respect for yourself, Jason and Jeff. However, dude, we created a connection. Like you're saying, yeah, our first interactions were through DMs, but then we got on a phone call and we spoke for, I remember I was at a state park walking and we spoke for an hour or more. And it was the first time we had ever
Yeah.
jumped on a phone call together. And it was like, I was sharing stuff about the supplement industry and you were sharing
Mhm.
stuff from business perspective. And it was reciprocal, but it was with no intention to get anything out of each other. It wasn't like, we're going to do this. I'm going to share your show. Like I was sharing your podcast because I genuinely enjoyed your content and I liked you. I aligned with you guys. And so it was never with that
You
intention.
liked
However, this
me.
is how great things begin. That's how a friendship begins. And that should be a lesson to everyone out there, that you shouldn't look to contact someone or associate with them to get anything in return. It could just be the fact that you get a relationship, a friendship that you can
Mhm.
build off of. And then we can do things later. So for instance, a couple years later, 2022, I was able to be, first Physique Education Collective at 2022, I was a speaker because of you. And so I was able to speak on the concept of energy flex. I was able to get on the Excellence Cartel multiple times. I was on the show 4 times over the 4-year period that you guys had it. And then, little by little, you and I worked to bring this podcast forward. And since then, we've done other conferences together. I've been to every single Physique Education Collective that you guys have had since 2021. And so it has just been something that has slowly built. And as with everything, good things take time, but also it's an investment on both of our ends. So, this is just a lesson to those out there. Like, yes, I'm not saying like, I'm not the type of guy that's like looking for relationships in terms of like my intimate relationships on social media. But I will say social media can become a building ground to create great friendships, which can last a lifetime.
I agree 100%. Let's get into this motherfucker.
Let's do it.
Why it's important to discuss the physiology and psychology of weight loss. Whew, boy, this one goes hand in hand because so many people tie their whole life existence to what a scale says. And it doesn't matter unless you jump from a 3-story building.
All right. So weight loss resistance is a topic that's becoming more and more spoken about lately within
Do
our
you think
industry.
that real quick, do you think
Yep.
that's a marketing term, or do you think that that's actually like a thing that, because I've heard it before, a lot of people be like, and gym pop people say, I just can't lose weight. It's like my body just says, no, you can't. It's like it resists anything I do. So it's not like it's an uncommon thing, but is weight loss resistance, that phrase, a marketing term, or is it actually mentioned before we get into this in the scientific literature that we're about to go over?
No, so there are scientific papers dating back to the 90s that speak about people who claim to have a resistance to weight loss. It is never termed as weight loss resistance, and we will go through this in depth. However, what I really think it is there's a difference between those who have a resistance with weight loss, like they encounter struggles or they encounter, obstacles, as we all do. Honestly, if you think about it, every single one of us has struggled at some point with a fat loss phase. However,
Mhm.
the term weight loss resistance has become extremely trendy and catchy. And I believe there's been some simple stories spun around it, and it has become somewhat of a marketing term. It's become trendy. It's become, the next, leaky gut. It's become the next leaky gut.
It's a
That's
good
not
way
in the
to say it.
literature. That's
That's a good way
not
to
in the
say it.
literature. Leaky gut is
Right.
not in the literature. It is intestinal permeability. And if you look at it, a lot of the claims around leaky gut and intestinal permeability, some of them do align. So there is some truth. I will say this, there is always some truth in what you hear. However, oftentimes people misextrapolate things and they make some claims about it that aren't substantiated by evidence or what we actually see in the trenches. So really when it comes down to it, when we think about weight loss resistance, we're going to think about it today in the terms of what we hear other people marketing about or the claims that are made. And it's really become something that's extremely, it's become more spoken about lately, especially within the functional nutrition space. And this is something that you and I exist in. So we hear this probably more commonly than if someone is just a personal trainer at a regular gym. But as with most things within the fitness and nutrition industry, these labels and situations often get taken far out of context. And now it seems like every other person you meet will tell you that they can't lose weight because they have weight loss resistance, as though this diagnosis is as common as having vitamin D deficiency. Now, this isn't to say that weight loss resistance isn't a thing, but it's not nearly as common as many people, including coaches, currently make it seem. And it's important for us to discuss these concepts because many hear about weight loss resistance and hear a few of its components and automatically assume they fit the bill and have it. And just the mere fact of taking on this label can cause someone to feel helpless and as though weight loss is an insurmountable barrier that they can't achieve due to having this weight loss resistance. And so I have worked with a ton of clients over the past decade who have told me that they've literally tried everything but cannot lose weight. However, when I dig in deeper, I realize that from their standpoint and perspective, they think they've tried everything. But seeing as the vast majority of these individuals don't have a background, don't have experience, don't have an education in both nutrition and physiology, they've tried every popular fad diet or trendy approach they've heard of to lose weight, but often they just haven't taken the right approach for them as an individual and really haven't dialed in all the details well enough to truly see the progress they desire. And you have to realize that just because a dietary approach is popular, like keto or carnivore or Whole30 or Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or Zone or, the South Beach diet, doesn't mean it's appropriate for you as an individual. So just because the average person you see online or in a nutrition advertisement has reported that they've lost weight using X approach does not mean that it's applicable or right for you. And this is where personalized nutrition coaching comes in, as individuals like Jeff and myself create nutrition, training, exercise, and lifestyle programs that are based on your individual physiology, your diet history, your lab work, your schedule, your time availability, things like your abilities, your preferences, your stresses, and your overall lifestyle. And then we help to navigate around the difficulties, challenges, and obstacles you face along the journey, which is something none of these fad diets do, as they just provide a cookie cutter approach that provides absolutely no customization. And what I find is that many coaches and clients alike are now labeling themselves as having weight loss resistance, when a dietary approach or protocol that has worked for others or has worked for them in the past no longer works. But I generally think this comes from a misunderstanding about how human physiology as well as fat loss physiology works. It's important for us to acknowledge the fact that the vast majority of individuals, including nutritional professionals, struggle with weight loss, because although it sounds simple on paper in terms of just needing to eat less and exercise more, it's much more complex in practice, where we actually have to try to consistently do these things in the real world and are trying to maintain a deficit on a daily basis when we have other stresses and responsibilities in life, such as our work, our relationships, kids, financial burdens, and a ton of other factors that cause stress on an emotional, a mental, a physical, and a psychological level. So let me make this evidently clear to everyone out there. Most of us struggle during a fat loss phase, including Jeff and myself, who have been at this for a decade plus and have literally made a career out of this. But not everyone who struggles with weight loss has a disorder or is dysfunctional or actually has weight loss resistance. And most usually encounter challenges during a fat loss phase because, unfortunately, much of this industry only focuses on nutrition in terms of macros and calorie subtractions, and training in terms of sets and reps. But this isn't an approach that's all encompassing and addresses every area needed to overcome weight loss challenges. And I always tell my clients that coaching goes far beyond nutrition in terms of macros and calories, and training in terms of sets and reps. And the reason why I dig into so many areas of their life outside of nutrition and training, and I track a ton of biofeedback and health markers and have them run comprehensive blood work, which I know you do as well, is because we can't just pay attention to what we do in the gym in terms of our training and in the kitchen in terms of our meals. So on today's podcast, we're going to specifically dig into whether diet-induced metabolic adaptations cause weight loss resistance and then predispose us to automatically weight regain after we finish the diet.
Okay, so then who generally experiences weight loss resistance? So you tend, at least for me, it tends to be the 40 plus male and females tend to say that. You don't really see it in the 20 or 30s, or that's not their first and foremost complaint. Let me put it to you like that. So who generally experiences it then, I guess, based upon the research? And would you say what I just said, would that align kind of what you see with the clients you work with?
In some situations, based on their previous history. So if it is
Previous
a 40-year-old, yes, if it is a 40-year-old who has went through cyclical dieting their entire life since they're 16 years old, yes. If it is someone, sometimes you get like a unicorn case, Jeff. I don't know, I'm sure you've had this over the years where it's like someone was just a healthy individual, they were athletic, but they kind of fell out of favor with fitness through their 30s or through their 20s and 30s. They, I get a lot of like entrepreneurs that work in completely different sectors. So for instance, I have a woman, we got her in her best shape in her 50s after she had went through menopause, and she was worried initially about the fact that she had seen down regulations in her hormones, bone mineral density was coming down. She was starting to be at a higher risk for osteopenia and osteoporosis. She hadn't trained since her 30s. So we got her back in the gym. We actually, over the course of, we worked together for about 2 years. Eventually she got on hormone replacement therapy, and through a confluence of factors like training interventions, lifestyle, nutrition, increasing protein intake, offsetting anabolic resistance, getting her on specific supplementation in addition to her hormone replacement therapy, she literally got in the best shape of her life, and claims to feel better now than she ever has in her 20s, 30s, and 40s. But also we completely changed her lifestyle. So that would not be a case of someone that is in their 40s or 50s, a female that has a rampant diet history that would suffer from weight loss resistance. But really, I want to differentiate between essentially what we see, or what people claim to be, or essentially what ends up happening is people will claim that they're weight loss resistant for certain reasons, and then what true weight loss resistance is and who really experiences it. So, as I mentioned previously, not everyone who struggles with weight loss has weight loss resistance. And it's really important to differentiate between the two, because everyone out there has struggled with weight loss at some point in their life. If not, it would be easy and we wouldn't have the diet recidivism rates that we have currently. However, we have to realize that we cannot say that because everyone struggles with weight loss, that everyone's weight loss resistant, because that would mean 95%. We see statistically 95% of diets fail. That would mean 95% of our population is weight loss resistant, and that is a fallacy. And so most individuals who struggle with weight loss do so for a number of reasons. It could be due to a lack of knowledge around nutrition and the lack of awareness around their nutritional habits and eating behaviors, an inability to manage hunger due to not constructing your diet in a manner that helps them regulate their appetite, manage their hunger, maximize satiety, and stay adherent to their calorie budget. It can be due to a ton of life stresses, which impact every area of their physiology, from their cortisol levels to their hormone levels to their sleep quality, all of which hinder fat loss and also increase appetite and cravings, which make it harder to stick to the calorie intake they need to hit to effectively lose fat. So they end up slipping up more than they even realize and are eating far more calories than what they need to be in order to continue losing weight. And this is especially prevalent. A lot of people struggle with weight loss because they're stuck in their old ways, where they're dead set on taking an approach that they've seen work for others or that has worked for them in the past. But here's the thing: if what you're doing isn't and hasn't been working, continuing to do the same thing isn't going to lead to any better results. So if you want to change and improve your body composition, you need to be willing to change and improve your dietary approach, your habits, your behaviors, and your lifestyle. So individuals who struggle with weight loss due to any of these reasons generally aren't weight loss resistant. Now, when it comes to those who generally experience weight loss resistance, this usually comes from a multitude of factors sustained over a very long, continuous period of time that create essentially like this perfect storm of sorts that can lead to weight loss resistance. And the clients who I've worked with that I can honestly say have suffered from weight loss resistance generally have a very long history of chronic dieting, meaning they've spent most of their lives dieting and trying to live in a calorie deficit. These individuals have gone through years and dozens of cycles of weight loss and weight regain, and have gotten to the point where they basically have to live their lives on low calories to be able to try to lose weight. And they're eating very low amounts of calories. And then in conjunction with that, they've been over exercising, especially in terms of their cardio and their boot camp classes. And we're talking about things like spin and hit. It's always like these commonalities we see. And it's worked for them for a period of time. But eventually, they get to the point where the cyclical yo yo dieting approach starts to cause negative ramifications because they continue this vicious cycle over and over and over again. And the cycle generally looks like this: anytime they diet, they do so in an aggressive manner, where they slash their calories in an effort to maximize weight loss. And I really want to key in on this. They're only focused on weight loss. But every time they do, they lose a ton of muscle in the process. And due to how aggressively they've cut their calories, they do lose weight. But seeing as they diet on such low calories, they put themselves into this state of low energy availability, where they're in this catabolic state, which leaves them highly predisposed to losing lean mass. They've also taken suboptimal approaches to dieting time and time again, where they don't prioritize and eat a sufficient amount of high quality protein to help with the retention of lean muscle mass. They don't resistance train in a progressive manner to maintain muscle. So their body isn't even receiving a signal to maintain their metabolic active tissue. They're constantly underfueling themselves, and they're overly fixated on burning as many calories as possible. So most of the exercise they do is high intensity cardio and boot camp and HIIT classes, so that they can burn as many calories as possible, because that is their fixation, that is their focus. And all of these variables just predispose them to being in a massive deficit and in a catabolic state, where they're not providing their body with any stimulus or any signal for anabolism, and no reason for their body to preserve lean muscle mass. So they're basically just hemorrhaging muscle during the process. Now, due to how severe of a deficit they've put themselves in, how little they're eating, and the amount of muscle they lose, they experience ravenous hunger and what's referred to as hyperphagia, which is an extreme drive to eat, which feels insatiable. So eventually they get to the point where they can't take it anymore, and they veer off the rails and spend the weekend binge eating, where they gain back a considerable amount of weight, which is most of which is fat, because their body is so depleted that they've primed themselves to store fat whenever they eat in excess, especially as most of the time they're eating everything and anything in sight. And if you actually discuss and have conversations and you're open with these individuals, they'll tell you exactly what they're eating. And it's usually a bunch of hyperpalatable, calorie packed junk foods they've been avoiding the entire time they've been crash dieting. Now, here's the issue: when you've aggressively dieted and have lost a ton of weight, including a ton of muscle, your body is primed for fat regain anytime you go back into a surplus, especially if you go right from a massive deficit to a massive surplus from a weekend or a week of overeating. But here's the thing, fat gain and muscle gain work on different time courses, meaning we're able to regain fat much quicker than we are able to gain back lean muscle mass. However, in order to recover our metabolic rate and undo the metabolic adaptations from dieting, we need to do two things. We need to go back to at least our maintenance calorie intake for a prolonged period of time, so at least a minimum of 4 weeks, but for most, this will take 8 weeks plus, and we need to regain any lost muscle tissue that we've lost. However, these individuals do neither of these things. They go from a state of extreme crash dieting for weeks and months on end to extreme overeating for a few days or a week, and then because they see their scale weight go up so quickly, they panic and go right back to their previous dieting approach where they undereat and over restrict to try to lose the weight they've gained as quickly as possible. Now, every time they overly restrict themselves and go into an aggressive diet, they lose more and more muscle and experience the same issue where they're excessively hungry, eventually snap and fall off the wagon, and regain mostly fat, as regaining fat happens much more quickly after a diet than regaining muscle does. So each time they go through this cycle, they're essentially losing lean muscle mass, which is metabolically active tissue. And what they're doing is they're replacing it with fat mass, which burns about 1/3 the amount of calories per pound that muscle does. And over time, this situation leads them to have a downregulated total daily energy expenditure, a decreased metabolic rate, downregulated hormones, including thyroid and sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone. So over time, they notice that they need to eat less and less just to lose a bit of weight and to try to lose the fat they regained after their last diet. Because essentially what's happening is they're just getting fatter and less muscular over every single consecutive cycle. So eventually they get to this point where they've stressed their body so much and went through essentially body decomposition, meaning they've lost a significant amount of metabolically active and calorie burning muscle tissue and have replaced it with more fat mass. So they're not only a smaller yet fatter version of themselves, but they also notice that the amount of calories they need to drop down to over time is so low that it's unsustainable and they can't adhere to it. So they're unable to lose weight and they feel stuck. Now, this is a situation we can dive into at another time, but today we're going to specifically focus on whether metabolic adaptation causes weight loss resistance, as there's a difference between developing weight loss resistance after years of crash, dieting and binge restrict cycles, and the metabolic adaptations that come along with dieting for fat loss in an intelligent manner, which is really what I want to differentiate so that those out there realize that there's a difference. So if you guys are taking an intelligent approach to your dieting efforts and you think your weight loss resistance because you encountered some struggles or some obstacles or some stalls along the way, this is where we really got to differentiate. And this is where we're going to dive into the research. We're going to dive into all the available evidence to show you that what your experience is metabolic adaptation, but it is not weight loss resistance.
So then what are the common claims around metabolic adaptation, weight loss resistance? I know you get people who diet for 2 weeks, they don't lose anything, like, oh, I'm metabolically adapted. I'm like, I don't know if that's true. But
that's called not being in a deficit and using a calorie calculator, because if you go off of, say, and we've done a whole episode on this,
yep,
a huge deep dive on
it's
this.
It's an earlier one.
It was our first series. We did why you guys should not use calorie calculator, something along those lines with the title. However, that is, if you have not lost weight in the few weeks that you've been in a diet, you have not induced a deficit. I don't care what your calorie calculator tells you. I don't care what your macro coach tells you. The law of thermodynamics over 3 to 4 weeks, unless you are going through massive hormonal fluctuations, you have water retention from your menstrual cycle, or you have rapid fluctuations in cortisol elevations causing stress-induced water retention, you are not in a deficit, unfortunately. That just means you have to lower calories a little bit more, and you should be seeing weight loss once you get into an actual effective calorie deficit. But when it comes to the common claims around metabolic adaptation and weight loss resistance, many are under the impression that metabolic adaptation actually causes weight loss resistance. And this is because there are many unsubstantiated claims around metabolic adaptation that cause many to fear it due to the misconceptions put out by those who don't understand physiology well enough. Yet, they sell these concepts and claims with a high degree of confidence, which convinces many to believe that metabolic adaptation is the cause of weight loss resistance. And some of these claims include that metabolic adaptation can lead to metabolic damage, where you can permanently damage your metabolism, which is untrue, as our metabolisms are both adaptive and dynamic, meaning they respond to what we do in terms of our diet and current calorie intake, our training and our activity levels, our stress levels, and our sleep quality. and our lifestyle as a whole. So just like we see that metabolic rate decreases during a diet due to eating less, we also see that our metabolism upregulates and increases when we increase our calories and eat more, which is a topic we covered in detail in a recent episode, which was, I believe, episode 68 of this show. Another claim is that metabolic adaptation can cause someone to go into starvation mode, where they will actually gain weight from eating too few calories and can actually gain weight in a calorie deficit, which is literally impossible from an energy balance, a thermodynamics, a physics, and a physiological perspective. So in no way, shape, or form can someone gain weight if they're truly in a calorie deficit. Another common belief is that metabolic adaptation is an insurmountable barrier to weight loss, which will completely stall someone's weight loss even if they're in a deficit. And the final common thought is that metabolic adaptation from dieting is a barrier to weight loss maintenance, meaning after the diet is done, you're still going to be, facing struggles just because of metabolic adaptation. Now, here's the thing. Metabolic adaptation is both a transient and a temporary state induced by being in the deficit, meaning the only way to maintain these diet-induced metabolic adaptations is to literally, and hear me out when I say this, is to literally stay in a deficit for life. That is the only way that you can make these adaptations permanent. And I'll tell you, they've tried to do long-term dieting studies to see if they have effects on longevity, like they do in those mouse studies or those rat studies. And people have been unable to maintain a deficit for longer periods of time, even for just 2 years, which obviously 2 years sounds like a long time, but I'm saying like they're not in a metabolically adapted state, even when we look at their energy expenditure, because they're eating off plan and they're eating more calories than they're supposed to be in a deficit. So let's just make this clear. No one is experiencing metabolic adaptation for life. And we also have tons of evidence that finds that metabolic adaptation is reversed by getting out of a calorie deficit and a state of negative energy balance and getting back to at least maintenance calories, aka energy balance, or above. And this is because getting out of a deficit in and of itself helps to increase energy expenditure, or the amount of calories you burn per day, which has previously been reduced from eating less. And also, regaining any lost muscle tissue or lost muscle mass is going to help increase your metabolic rate. So if metabolic adaptation caused permanent resistance to weight loss, we wouldn't be able to reverse these adaptations.
Often I find when people think their metabolism is broken and all that, they've just never done anything really consistently, to really kind of like work on their metabolism and
on
like
both
get it
ends.
healthy. Yeah. And it's kind of hard when I look at their intake and their dieting history, I'm like, well, you've dieted for like 18 years straight. So, I mean, surely it's not going to do what you want it to. Or you have the guys who overeat a lot. And then I'm like, well, surely it's not working that way either. And that's why I'm like, intuitive eating just doesn't work if you really want to work on your metabolism. But that's some really great points that you brought up in that, which leads me to does metabolic adaptation, would that in effect cause weight loss resistance? Because that'd be a question I would have. Would this make it go, it doesn't work anymore? Oh, fuck it. I'm weight loss resistant. That's my problem. Go get 18 supplements, get some T3 and fix it.
All right. So just to make this evidently clear, point blank, metabolic adaptation from a fat loss diet does not cause weight loss resistance if someone diets correctly, meaning that they go through phasic and periodized phases of dieting to lose body fat, and then they follow these periods of being in a deficit with periods of time going back to eating at maintenance calories and getting out of a deficit, whether that be through a post-diet reverse dieting phase, a recovery dieting phase, or a maintenance phase. And it certainly does not cause weight loss resistance if we also go back through muscle building phases where we eat above maintenance calories and sufficiently fuel ourselves to train in a progressive manner, build more metabolically active muscle tissue, and build up more metabolic resistance. And in a 2020 review by Katia Martins, who's one of the leading researchers in the world of metabolism and metabolic adaptation, her and her colleagues outlined the effects we see from the best available literature on metabolic adaptations both during an active weight loss phase and after. And the review found a few commonalities that are seen across the entire body of literature on this topic. And they basically broke it down to 4 main effects that are seen from metabolic adaptation. So we'll go through all of them. The first one is we see a reduction in an individual's measured energy expenditure, both at rest and during exercise. And we only see that during active weight loss, meaning when someone's actively losing weight from being in a calorie deficit. And 2, metabolic adaptation defined as a measured energy expenditure below what would be predicted by weight alone is an artifact of weight loss and is what Dr. Martins refers to as an illusion, which is only present in individuals when energy expenditure measurements are done when they're still actively in a deficit, which is what we should expect, because if you're eating less, then what it takes your body to maintain, what it takes energetically to maintain your body weight is, going to mean that you're going to be burning less calories than you would if you were eating at maintenance calories. Number 3, Metabolic adaptation at the level of resting metabolic rate reflects the magnitude of weight loss achieved during a weight loss diet. So the more weight you lose, the more metabolic rate will go down until you get to 10% of body weight loss or more. Where metabolic rate drops seem to stabilize and does not continue to drop. So when we look at studies which first have individuals lose 10% of their body weight and they measure their resting metabolic rate, and then they have them go back into an active weight loss phase to lose another 10% of their body weight so that they've lost 20% in total, which is a massive amount of weight loss, they do not see a further reduction in resting metabolic rate, as RMR is the energy we need to keep the lights on and for our body to operate at rest. So there's an actual limit. Like, think about this from a logical perspective. There should be a limit that we have a limit to how much energy we can reduce and still keep the lights on. And so there's a limit to how low our resting metabolic rate can get, because if not, we wouldn't have enough energy to even function or survive at rest, which would mean we die. So the only time you're seeing metabolic damage to the point where your metabolic rate goes lower than your RMR can survive on, more than 10% of body weight loss, you'd be dead. So say that your RMR dropped to 1,200 calories per day after losing 10% of your body weight. If you were to continue trying to lose weight, it's not like your metabolic rate is going to continue decreasing until you have a resting metabolic rate of 800 calories per day. And what's interesting is we have a ton of studies that actually utilize 800-calorie liquid diets to induce massive weight loss in obese populations, and we don't see that their metabolic rates drop to 800 calories per day, which causes them to be unable to continue losing weight despite being in a severe calorie deficit. So never do we see RMR damage so much that people can no longer lose weight in aggressive deficits. And four, and this is last but not least, we do not have a single study that shows that the degree of metabolic adaptation experienced during a diet predicts an individual's weight regain. And they also concluded that failure to establish energy balance after weight loss, meaning not bringing an individual back up to their maintenance calorie intake, can lead to misleading impressions and interpretations that those who have lost weight are continuing to experience metabolic adaptation. So no, metabolic adaptation does not cause weight loss resistance or metabolic damage when someone is automatically predisposed to regaining weight because they ate too little calories.
Okay, so then I'm going to throw you this one. Does metabolic adaptation slow down weight loss in those with a adaptive or / thrifty metabolism?
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're covering weight loss resistance as well as metabolic adaptation. I want to make it clear that metabolic adaptation does not cause weight loss resistance, but in essence, it's not going to completely stop someone from having the ability to lose weight, which is an effect many will speak about when they speak about weight loss resistance. So those with weight loss resistance will not see, we're not seeing that metabolic adaptation is causing weight loss resistance. However, it is important to note that for those with an adaptive metabolism or a thrifty metabolic phenotype, which is something we discussed in one of the shows, metabolic adaptation can slow down the rate of weight loss, but a slowing of someone's weekly rate of fat loss is much different than completely blocking someone's ability to lose weight and causing long-term stalls and plateaus in weight loss. So Martins and colleagues have recently done 2 in-depth research studies analyzing how much weight loss slows down by in those who experience a much greater degree of metabolic adaptation than the average individual. Meaning, when we look at the outliers in a weight loss study who have a much more adaptive and thrifty metabolism, what they're looking at is how much slower do they lose weight and how much longer do they need to diet to lose the same amount of fat as compared to those who experience a normal and average degree of metabolic adaptation. And the research has found that those who experience much greater degrees of metabolic adaptation during active weight loss phases lose weight at a slower rate as a result and take longer to reach their weight loss goals. However, both studies found that metabolic adaptation did not stop or prevent these individuals from losing a significant amount of weight, nor did it stop any of them from losing weight entirely. And so in a 2021 study by Martins and colleagues, they looked to determine the association between metabolic adaptation and weight loss and fat loss outcomes in response to a low-calorie diet after adjusting for dietary adherence and other confounders. And to do this, they put individuals on a 1,000-calorie per day diet for 8 weeks and measured their energy expenditure prior to the start of dieting and at the end of the 8-week dieting phase to determine each individual's degree of metabolic adaptation. And over the course of 8 weeks, participants lost an average of around 31 pounds. which is a significant amount of weight loss. And they found that in those who experienced the greatest degree of metabolic adaptation, it did lower their total amount of weight loss per day, but it wasn't a huge amount. So they found that an average decrease of 92 calories in resting metabolic rate across the group. But for those who sustained a 50 calorie per day greater decrease in metabolic rate, where they had a 142 calorie reduction in metabolic rate, meaning that they saw over a 50% greater degree of metabolic adaptation than the group average, this resulted in them losing 1 less pound over the course of an 8-week study, which is a negligible difference, as this means someone with massive metabolic adaptation lost 30 pounds in 8 weeks instead of 31 pounds, which could easily be overcome by making further dietary adjustments or doing things like we could simply increase their physical activity, as we're talking 50 calories per day, which is less than an extra 10-minute walk per day. And so then in a 2022 study by the same research group, they looked at the effect that experiencing much greater degree of metabolic adaptation had in terms of how long it would take for these individuals to reach the same weight loss outcome or the same weight loss goal as someone experiencing a normal degree of metabolic adaptation. And they did this after adjusting for an individual's degree of adherence, which is an important component of both of these studies because, as we covered in episode 70, so just a recent episode of the podcast, research finds that there's a much lower or a much higher likelihood that a lack of weight loss success and weight loss stalls are due to a slip in dietary adherence much more frequently than due to metabolic adaptation. And in this study, they had female participants lose 16% of their body weight, which came out to an average weight loss of around 28 pounds. And on the group average, they found that it took them 155 days to achieve this degree of weight loss. And the average metabolic adaptation was 46 calories per day. But for every 10 calorie increase in metabolic adaptation, it delayed their time to reach the 16% weight loss goal by 1 day. So say you experience a metabolic adaptation of 146 calories per day as compared to the average amount, which was 46 calories per day. This means you adapted 3 times as much or 3 times as hard as the average person in the study. However, all you'd have to do is diet for 10 more days to reach your weight loss goal, which isn't a significant amount of time. So yes, metabolic adaptation does slow or slowly extend the time it takes to lose or get to a weight loss goal. But again, it doesn't completely stop or, cause a weight loss stall or cause this weight loss resistance, essentially, where you literally cannot continue losing weight despite being in deficit. And Martins and colleagues is the research group that has done the most in-depth research on this topic, but their findings are in line with what the rest of the metabolism-specific research groups find as well. So, for example, we have a 2022 study by Holstein, who is the researcher who does pretty much all of the metabolic phenotype research. And we covered a lot of his research in episode 69 of the show. And they analyzed, in one of his studies, he analyzed how significant of an effect metabolic adaptation has on weight loss outcomes in those who experience the greatest degree of metabolic adaptation during a diet. And this study used an aggressive deficit. So it was an aggressive approach to dieting where they dieted subjects on a 50% deficit under their maintenance calories. So say that you maintain your maintenance calories at 2,500 calories. This means that off the bat, day one of the study, they dropped it down to 1,250 calories. And then they looked at the amount of metabolic adaptation in the first, the third, and the sixth week of the study to essentially determine the individuals who adapted the most during the early phase of the weight loss diet, and then analyze how much less weight they lost as an experience or as a result of experiencing this greater degree of metabolic adaptation. And those with the most adapted metabolisms, they found that their total daily energy expenditure dropped by 178 calories, which amounted to a 1 pound difference in fat loss by the end of the study. So yes, those with more adaptive metabolisms will see less weight loss from the same deficit. However, it's a small difference which could easily be made up by simply dieting for a week or two longer. Then also, we have to keep in mind that this study used a very aggressive approach to weight loss in terms of using a 50% deficit. And as we covered on episode 68 of the podcast, the more you reduce your calorie intake, the more your calorie expenditure is going to decrease as a result of metabolic adaptation. So the degree of metabolic adaptation that we see in this study is likely greater than most of us would experience in the real world, who take a less extreme approach to dieting and who use a more moderate calorie deficit. And the issue with metabolic adaptation and why many misunderstand its effects is that those who tend to have more adaptive metabolisms, meaning that they need to make larger reductions in their calorie intake while dieting to see weight loss, assume that this means that there is something wrong with them metabolically, or that they're weight loss resistant, or that they're damaged and they're unable to lose fat, which isn't the case. Yes, metabolic adaptation can slow down our rate of weight loss and cause us to, or essentially cause us to have to take a bit longer to reach a specific weight loss goal, but it does not completely stall, it does not completely stop, or it does not completely halt weight loss, which is something I hope people will realize by the end of this podcast. So they stop putting labels on themselves and they stop constructing these self-limiting beliefs and narratives that there's something wrong with them and they're destined to not achieve their weight loss and their body composition outcomes. So if you are someone who has adaptive metabolism, and this is me, to be honest with you, this is something I've had to accept and realize, hey, I'm gonna have to get my calories pretty low to get fucking peeled. This is par for the course. It's a part of the game. I really hope those out there that do have an adaptive metabolism realize that although it may be a little bit more difficult, you can still lose a substantial amount of body fat by remaining consistent, accurately tracking your intake, and using a longer and more strategic dietary approach when looking to lose the same amount of fat as someone else who has a less adaptive metabolism.
Yeah, I'm the same boat as you, man. Like, I'm at 3,300 calories, and Joe's like, dude, you're gaining lean. Scoop's doing a good job. I'm up 30 pounds almost 5 weeks post show.
Woo!
But I was at 1,600 grinding in 5 weeks ago. So it lets you know, which leads us to the next point. Does metabolic adaptation persist after a fat loss phase? I don't think so. I think it matters what you put in your mouth. Like, meaning if you go blow it and eat a bunch of sugary shit and everything else after fat loss phase, which most people do, yeah, you're probably going to have like a little where it just doesn't do what you want it to do. But I think if you do it right, you can kind of get away with that. There's no such thing. And I bet the science would probably say that's true. I hope
so honestly, to put it simply, metabolic adaptation is only present and seen during an active weight loss phase when we are in a calorie deficit and actively losing weight. And the most rigorous study we have on this is a 2020 study by Martins and colleagues, and pretty much answers this question in the title of their study. So let me pull this up because I want to actually read you guys off the actual title of the study. And it is: metabolic adaptation is an illusion, only present when participants are in negative energy balance. And what's funny about this study is actually, Jeff, you sent me this study years ago, and you asked me how to interpret it. And you wanted me to dive in a little bit deeper. So we went back and forth on this. This is literally 2020. It was either 2020 or 2021. So we went back and forth.
2021. We were chatting about it before one of the PECs in Dallas.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so we're going to go in deep so that the audience really understands it, because I want people to understand what researchers meant by this title. And that's why I pulled it up and read it. And so in this study, they took men and women and put them on a 1,000-calorie weight loss diet for 8 weeks, where they lost an average of over 13% of their body weight, which came out to 31 plus pounds. So keep in mind, they not only put them on a very low-calorie diet, but also had them lose a significant amount of body weight in a short period of time using an aggressive rate of loss, meaning that essentially this is a much faster rate of loss than either of us would use with our own clients, as both this low calorie of a diet and fast rate of weight loss has been shown to induce significant degrees of metabolic adaptations in these short time periods. But they did this purposely. They wanted to induce a great degree of metabolic adaptation to really test this theory. And so after finishing the 8-week active weight loss phase, they put them into a weight stabilization phase for 4 weeks, followed by 9 months of a maintenance phase. And at the end of the 8-week active weight loss phase, they when they were still in a deficit, they measured their resting metabolic rate, and it was 92 calories lower than predicted. So they had experienced a metabolic adaptation as a result of losing a significant portion of their body weight, which in this case was, I believe, around 13.2%. However, after 4 weeks of being in the weight stabilization phase, this degree of metabolic adaptation was down to 38 calories lower than predicted, which isn't substantial given the amount of weight loss that they had not only lost, but they had maintained in that period. Then when they tested them again after 9 months at maintenance, there was no difference between their actual resting metabolic rate and their predicted resting metabolic rate. So decreases in an actual metabolic rate are modest, even with significant weight loss. And these adaptations are only significant and seen when we're actually in an energy deficit. But once we go back to our maintenance calorie intakes, these adaptations are reversed. So metabolic adaptation does not persist after someone has finished a weight loss phase. And we also have a literature review by Sinchenko et al. That specifically looked at whether the negative metabolic adaptations we experience during a weight loss diet persist after we go back to maintenance calories and back to a state of energy balance. And in this review, they analyzed studies where significant degrees of weight loss were achieved, including extreme weight loss studies, like my favorite. I'm going to bring it up. The Minnesota, starvation experiment that we've covered many times on the show. And they also did research, which is hugely fascinating, on those who suffered with anorexia and who have suffered severe degrees or extreme degrees of metabolic adaptation as a result of chronically underfueling themselves for years. Now, the reason why this review is so informative is that many take metabolic adaptation to mean that after a diet, your metabolism stays suppressed long-term, which is not the case if you get out of a deficit. And metabolic adaptation only exists if you stay in a permanent dieted down state and try to maintain the lowest level of body fat you achieve with the same or less calories per day than you dieted on to get down there. However, even when we look at the most aggressive dieting studies available, we see that those individuals' metabolism recover once they get out of a deficit. So, for example, in the Minnesota semi-starvation study, they had these guys maintain a 50% calorie deficit for 6 months straight, where most of them got down to 5% body fat, having lost 25% of their total body weight in the process. Now, in this trial, they saw that their resting metabolic rate went down by 15 to 20% more than they would have predicted just based off the weight loss themselves. So this was the greatest degree of metabolic adaptation in terms of an adaptive thermogenesis perspective that we've seen in literature. However, after the 6-month starvation portion of the study, they put these men into a refeeding period where they found that their resting metabolic rate went back to its baseline values where they were prior to the 6-month period of extreme dieting, which proves that even in the worst cases of being in a semi-starved state, our metabolisms do not stay permanently suppressed. And all of the studies they reviewed and analyzed in this review led them to conclude that changes in energy balance induce a rapid yet reversible increase or decrease in resting metabolic rate. And previous reports may have come to the erroneous conclusions in favor of the metabolic damage hypothesis because they did not fully examine the full recovery period in the Minnesota experiment or neglected the influence of energy balance, meaning your energy intake, on resting metabolic rate. And their findings indicate that the theory of permanent diet-induced metabolic slowing in non-obese individuals is not supported by the current literature. So we know that there are adaptations that occur during a calorie deficit, but they're all reversible once we get back to energy balance or to an energy surplus, which independently increases our metabolic rate and shows how adaptive our energy expenditure is both to under and overfeeding, which is something we covered in detail in both episodes 68 and 69 of the podcast.
So I guess the last question around this baby out. Does the degree of metabolic adaptation we experience, does it predict the weight regain? Like, I personally don't think that's necessarily true unless you eat bad. But again, I'll defer to the research and so forth. I've seen people, and I think you could test to this. Like, you remember when first dieting came out, that whole concept, it was 10 grams, 10 grams, 10 grams, and you never got really healthy and you just kind of stayed in this miserable state.
Well, that keeps you metabolically adapted. So what really
exactly
reverse dieting, the initial conception of it, I never utilized. I actually had a coach utilize it with me and I saw how bad it felt that I never utilized that approach with my own clients. However, that concept, if you're still in an energy deficit that entire time, so let's just say hypothetically, you were in a 500 calorie deficit at the end of your diet. If you're only raising your calories by 5 or 10 grams of carbs or 5 grams of fat, that's a 40 to 45 calorie increase. So now you just went from a 500 calorie deficit to a 450 calorie deficit or a 460 calorie deficit. You're still in a state of
metabolic your way back up.
Exactly. And that's why I'm really a big fan. And I've always said this, getting back to your predicted maintenance calories, which keep in mind, your maintenance after a diet is not the same as your maintenance prior to a diet. So for instance, when I diet down, my maintenance initially, when I start a fat loss phase, my maintenance prior to going into a fat loss phase is generally between 34 to 3,600 calories. However, what I've noticed after a fat loss diet is it's generally down to around 2,800 calories.
You're right.
But I have to diet sometimes down to 1,800 calories. So what do? If I'm on 1,800 calories at the end of a contest prep, I've always went just back to 2,800 calories. And I've done that with many of my larger male clients that have more adaptive metabolism, meaning that they downregulate more during a deficit and they upregulate more during a surplus. But even with my females, it's not uncommon for me to raise their calories 400 or 500 the day we stop dieting. The day the fat loss diet's ended, I'm getting them right out of a deficit and back to their predicted maintenance to undo these metabolic adaptations. That's why I always say that metabolic adaptation is reversed from getting into a state of energy balance, meaning your maintenance calorie threshold, which will not be the same after you've lost a significant body weight as it was previously. So just like in the example of females, maintenance calories were 2,000 and we needed to diet her down on 1,200 calories by the end of the diet. And now her new predicted maintenance is 1,700. I'm not going to raise her back to 2,000 because that's going to put her in a 300 calorie surplus. But I am going to take her from 1,200 to 1,700. So she is going to see a 500 calorie increase in her current dietary intake. But when we go back to, does the degree of metabolic adaptation we experience predict weight regain? And Why I wanted to cover this is that there's a notion of that the degree of metabolic adaptation that someone experiences predicts the amount of weight regain. And this is just another myth we need to put to bed. As I often hear people make this claim, and I've had many new clients who have come to me over the years, tell me that they've been unable to successfully lose weight and keep it off in the past because they have an adaptive metabolism, which is a concept that literally stands on no footing, but is said so commonly that it makes it sound like, many take it as like common knowledge. But just like common sense isn't common these days, just because something is said frequently and regurgitated often doesn't mean it's true or has any evidence behind it. So the first thing we need to do before speaking about this is separate weight and fat gain post-diet. So it's completely normal to regain scale weight after finishing a diet. Because when we lose weight, we not only lose body fat, but we also lose glycogen and the water
Yep.
associated with storing glycogen. So when we go back to eating at maintenance, we're going to see an increase in scale weight as a result of replenishing glycogen stores and also the 3 to 4 grams of water that comes along with every gram of glycogen we store, and also due to the increase in food mass. So we're taking in more food weight that's now in our intestines from eating more. However, this is not actual fat regain. This is a natural increase that we're going to see in scale weight first and foremost. And this is actually an increase in lean body mass, which is a good thing and a natural part of the process of getting out of the deficit and back to maintenance. However, when we actually look at fat regain or predicting weight regain after a diet, we do have recent research that looks at whether there's a relationship between metabolic adaptation predicting weight regain. So in a 2020 study entitled "Metabolic Adaptation is Not a Barrier to Weight Loss Maintenance," they looked at the degree of metabolic adaptation during a diet and the weight regain in 171 women who lost an average of 26 pounds, which was around 16% of their body weight. And at the end of the dieting phase, they assessed their metabolic rate and saw an average 54-calorie drop in resting metabolic rate from metabolic adaptation. They also measured their metabolic rate at 4 weeks post weight loss diet and at 1 to 2 years of weight loss maintenance. And when they reanalyzed them after they were back in a state of energy balance, the degree of metabolic adaptation was not measurable. And they also saw no association with the degree of metabolic adaptation the women experienced and their chance of weight regain within 2 years of finishing the weight loss phase. They also specifically analyzed those in the group who regained the most amount of weight over 1 to 2 years post diet and found that those women had only experienced an average drop of 40 calories from the resting metabolic rate during weight loss, but had no signs of metabolic adaptation at 1 to 2 years post diet. So it wasn't like those who experienced the greatest metabolic adaptation experienced the most weight regain. And what most people think is that the larger the metabolic adaptation during weight loss, the higher the likelihood of weight regain. But what they found was that those who experienced the greatest amount of metabolic adaptation lost the most weight, and in this specific study had less of a chance of weight regain.
Yep.
And this is because metabolic adaptation isn't the cause of weight regain. It's the result of high amounts of weight loss. This is a physiological adaptation. This is not something that predicts, another, weight regain essentially. We also have a 2019 study by Nemo et al., which looked to analyze the physiological predictors of weight regain and found that there was no evidence that changes in resting metabolic rate, changes in exercise-induced energy expenditure, or changes in appetite following a weight loss diet predicted weight regain. So all the evidence we have finds that metabolic adaptation only persists past active weight loss if subjects are still in an energy deficit when their resting metabolic measurements are taken, and metabolic adaptation does not predict weight regain. And just to reinforce this further, I'm going to take a direct quote from one of Dr. Martin's studies that really elucidates this further. And she says, in this study, this is a review of the literature. And what they say is, quote, "No single study in the literature has shown that the reduction in energy expenditure below the predicted levels that may accompany weight loss is a risk factor for weight regain in the long term." So ultimately, guys, I hope that this podcast and the information and evidence we presented helps to clear the air on this topic regarding metabolic adaptation and its association with weight loss resistance, as there are so many individuals out there who sell this narrative that makes it seem like every person who struggles with weight loss has this condition of weight loss resistance. And I can't tell you how many times I receive emails or I receive DMs and I hear from individuals who think that they caught weight loss resistance almost like it's a virus and now they're helpless. And so all this does is distract you from the things you should be focusing on, which are the factors within your control. So instead of thinking about, do I have weight loss resistance or not, you should be thinking more about, your dietary decisions, your dietary habits, your habits around training and physical activity, getting your steps in, your sleep and stress management skills, and the practices that you take around these, the routines that you have, and how consistently you nail these variables, which are all going to lead to more progress than getting hyper fixated on whether you have weight loss resistance or not, and getting into the state of paralysis by analysis, as I find that so many people get so stuck in the contemplation phase of weight loss that they never follow through and execute upon their goals, which is why they never see the progress they desire. So if this sounds like you, I encourage you to contact a qualified nutritional professional like Jeff or myself, and go and work with someone who is going to empower you to make the necessary changes to your life to attain the progress you desire, rather than going to someone that's going to sell you some simple story that hits on your pain points and makes you feel dysfunctional and damaged. Because that's really what we have. We have this dichotomous, kind of marketing this in this industry where it's like the people that are most popular are like selling these narratives and these simple stories, and they're getting like their real shared because people hear about these experiences and they really hit on these pain points. You struggle to lose weight. You feel like everything you do doesn't work. You try so hard and it never works for you. Yes, we all experience that. That is in every aspect of life. But then they give you this label and they say, you have weight loss resistance. And that's why you're not seeing weight loss. And I can fix you. And as soon as we get to that area where it's about coaches fixing people, coaches are not fixers. They are not, holistic, solvers or whatever it may be. Coaches are guides. They are mentors, they are educators, and there are people that are going to hold your hand and walk you through the process, but they aren't here to fix you. And this is the reason why none of you guys need fixing. What you really need is someone that's going to really support you, empower you, educate you, and really show you that you have much more potential than you ever thought possible. And we're going to maximize that and optimize that. And that's really what coaching is about. It's about empowering people rather than pulling them down and making them feel damaged and dysfunctional.
I couldn't wrap that up better. I think so many people walk around going, I'm broken. I'll like work with them. I'm like, see, no, you're not. Like after a few weeks, like, oh my baby Jesus, I'm fine. I'm like, yeah, you are. B, where can everybody find you at?
Guys, feel free to reach out to me at @BrandonDeCruz_ or through my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Guys, I love engaging with you guys and hearing all the feedback on podcasts and posts and things of that sort. But if it's a long message, please do email me. I am so much easier to contact. I literally live on my email. I don't leave. I'm in my office 10 to 12 hours a day, just typing on my computer. So if you guys have long messages or concepts or even topics you guys want us to cover, please do email me. It's bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. But as always, guys, please remember to like, share, and put some story shares of the show. And also remember that we will be back every single Friday to engage with you guys, provide you guys with value, and really appreciate the support that you guys show us. Jeff, where can they find you, my man?
Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram and YouTube, Relentless Forever. And soon I'll be Jeff Unbreakable Black on there. Is where I'm going to put my interviews, some of the stuff I do. Yeah, I look forward to connecting with y'all. As long as it's not voice note. Just kidding. All right, guys. Everyone's like, why not the voice note? I'm like, I go back and forth with my team so much in voice notes that sometimes I just want to read. I love reading. I won't watch a book movie. I'd rather read. So for me, reading something is way more enjoyable than hearing. It's weird. I don't know. I'm a weird
All
guy.
good, my man. Yeah, whatever your preference is.
Yeah, give me some more shrooms. I'll be good. But anyway, you guys have yourself a good week. Thanks for tuning in. Share the shit out of this. You guys got any comments, questions? Let us know. See ya.